growth of papal Rome begins with a tale of two entities. The first is Imperial Rome, or as some refer to as the revered Eternal Rome, as the capital city of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was well established in all governmental affairs, the economy, the military, and were especially reputable for their legal system. The second is the Christian movement, which established a rapidly growing community in the city of Rome. Some scholars argue that the Roman citizens mentioned in Acts chapter 2 verse 10, who witnessed the day of Pentecost, may have established Christianity in this city. It has been widely understood and accepted by historians that both Peter and Paul were martyred in Rome, and naturally Christians saw Rome as a special city in the sense that both the apostle to the Jews and the apostle of the Gentiles were killed there. Little did both Imperial Rome and the Christians at this time understand that this unofficial admiration attributed to Rome as the city of Apostle Peter and Paul would be the foundational platform for the papal power to be built upon. From these humble beginnings, our first written record of authority comes from a letter appropriated to be written about 96 AD. Around this time, the Flavian dynasty was in power, and Christians lived in obscurity and somewhat secrecy in the great city. However, a dispute arose within the Christian ranks. What type of dispute, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Church of Corinth had a group of young church members who decided to depose the delegated leadership. Clement of Rome was not impressed and wrote to rebuke this decision. Now, this is the first time any type of leader makes a claim to his authority based upon his inheritance of church leadership from the apostles. It has been said that Clement of Rome may have been a direct pupil of Peter. Clement explicitly confirms Peter's presence in Rome and under Peter's authority claimed jurisdiction over the church. Not only was this the first record of a bishop claiming authority, it is the first record we have of a bishop intervening in another church's affairs. However, we must note that while the Christians are handling their own affairs at this time, Imperial Rome have no interest in the Christians other than having meat for the games in the Colosseum. Fast forward to 253 AD and the Valerian dynasty comes to power, and in 4 years gives a decree that all Christians must adhere to the Roman pagan worship. Failure to do this would mean death, and thus began the citywide persecution of Christians. Around this time, another dispute arose among Christians. They argued whether those who had recanted their faith in fear of persecution should be accepted back into the Christian community. At this time, Stephen I was Bishop of Rome. Stephen maintained that they can be accepted back into the community by the laying of hands, while Cyprian of Carthage argued that they were a lost cause and should be left to God's judgment. Christians were divided in their opinions. To resolve the division in the church, Stephen the bishop was the first to express his primacy as the Bishop of Rome, and was the first to use the passage in Matthew 16 regarding Jesus' handing over leadership to Apostle Peter. Stephen was successful in his campaign, and accordingly he banished Cyprian of Carthage from the church and labelled him an outcast. Again, it is important to note that Imperial Rome had not direct influence on the church's leadership decisions. By 306 AD, a man who would forever change the destiny of Rome came into the picture. Not only did he revolutionize the ruling of Rome under one emperor, he also changed the fate of Christianity forever. Constantine's march into Rome to usurp Maxentius was the catalyst in which he claimed divine intervention. It has been recorded that Constantine saw a sign in the sky which said, "In this sign you will conquer." This took place when Constantine and his army were marching to Rome, and it is believed to be God's sign that he was chosen to rule Rome. In the next few years, Constantine played a huge part in the famous Edict of Milan in 313 AD, in which Roman citizens were allowed to worship any god they desired to. This meant Christians were allowed to worship their god without being threatened by the law. In 325 AD, Constantine convened the well-known Nicene Council, in which he intended to find unity among the churches, and by doing so, stated his intentions and position as a ruler to the churches. Constantine was the first emperor to ever bring Imperial Rome and the Christian Church under one rulership, as the Church was now part of Roman public law. When Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople, he inadvertently and unintentionally made the Church in Rome come to power. As the church used imperial methods to administer church affairs, they realised their need for a central figure to handle the disputes and disagreements that came up between the parish. By 355 AD, Constantine has forced his hand on Liberius the bishop to take up this position, and thus was the first bishop of Rome delegated by the emperor. By 382, the Emperor Theodosius made a significant inroad for the power of the Church by issuing a decree that all subjects of the Roman Empire were to adhere to the decisions set out in the Nicene Council. At the same time, the Bishop Damascus was consistently referring to the Church as the Roman See because of Paul and Peter's affiliation. By this time, this theme was only referred to and spoken of. However, Damascus made this theme official. With the Roman Church taking on a legal standing, they were now able to issue law-relating items to the Germanic tribes, thus beginning to have the papal influence in Europe. During the early part of the 5th century, Rome was vulnerable to attacks from barbarian tribes as the capital had been moved to Constantinople and Rome was left defenceless. Pope Leo the Great, or Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest as he liked to be called, held a pivotal role in stopping attacks on Rome by the Huns and Vandals. He also chaired the Council of Chalcedon, which was the job of the emperor. These two acts on behalf of Rome subsequently led to him making political claims to the vacant throne of Caesar. Pope Leo the Great was also very involved in church politics too. He also claimed his primacy from being Peter's heir, therefore the church should acknowledge him as their leader. In 530, Saint Benedict wrote his Rule of St. Benedict as a practical guide for monastic community life. Its message spread to monasteries throughout Europe. Monasteries became major conduits of civilization, preserving craft and artistic skills while maintaining intellectual culture within their schools, scriptoria and libraries. They functioned as agricultural, economic and production centres as well as a focus for spiritual life. During his reign, Justinian I introduced legislation that brought the power of the papacy to its peak. These included the headship over all churches, papal ability to eliminate heretics, and convincing secular powers to do his bidding when requested. During this period, the Visigoths and Lombards moved away from Arianism for Catholicism. Pope Gregory the Great played a notable role in these conversions and dramatically reformed the ecclesiastical structures and administration, which then launched renewed missionary efforts. Missionaries such as Augustine of Canterbury, who was sent from Rome to begin the conversions of the Anglo-Saxons, and coming the other way in the Hiberno-Scottish mission, Saints Columbanus, Boniface, Willibrord, Ansgar, and many others took Christianity into northern Europe and spread Catholicism among the Germanic and Slavic peoples and reached the Vikings and other Scandinavians in later centuries. So the rise of the development can be summed up into these main parts. 1. The claim to apostolic succession. 2. The legalizing of the Christian faith. 3. The Church adopting the imperial methods of administration. 4. Political strategy. 5. And by the 5th century, missionary purposes.